All right, I think we're going to start. We're all good? Say what? Make sure the what? Your lab is on.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
You got your green from beeping too?
You got green.
There you go. Right on.
Thank you, and welcome to Hegel 1313 with the one and only Cornel West. I'm just so thrilled and delighted that you're with us this evening. Cornel West, as you all know, is one of the greatest living philosophers today. He's thought critically and written on the topics that we're going to be focusing on tonight for decades. He's offered brilliant takes on Hegel and on Nietzsche for decades now. He's one of the first, really, to have engaged the importance of Hegel, particularly to the critical legal studies movement in the United States. And he recognized there, and this is in an important piece that he'd written back then, he really recognized in his words how Hegel emerges as an enabling figure to the critical legal studies movement, basically, in America, principally owing to his profound historicist sense, his penetrating critique of liberalism, and his illuminating insights about the kinds of Sittlichkeit, ethical life, requisite for a stable and harmonious modern society. Now, in many ways, I think Cornel West was drawn to Hegel, and in a way, in part, this is a real reflection of one of the greatest features of Cornel West, which is his generosity of spirit, right? So he was drawn to the positive side of Hegel, the side of Hegel that he thought would be helpful to him, looking, that is, for the good in this work. He actually aligned himself somewhat in certain respects. My own position, he said, is closely akin to and has elective affinities with that of Hegel, and writing as a historicist, pragmatist in close conversation with the best of the Marxist tradition, you wrote. But the idea, of course, was that it was important to recover pieces of Hegel, but also then to supplement them, to add to them, to complement them, because, of course, of their limitations as well. And it's here where you speak about that, the way in which actually the Hegelian framework can be limiting and can limit it, especially for those of us who are concerned about questions of race and gender and class, what you call the public sphere, the way it limits the public sphere. And you said that the recovery of Hegel in legal studies can be quite helpful in moving in the direction of my own position, yet, and here is the important yet, right? Without Marx, Gramsci, Du Bois, de Beauvoir, Lord, and others, we remain in a limited public dialogue about our truncated public space in liberal societies, which seems entirely right to me. So there's much to take from Hegel, so long, of course, as we supplement it with this vast other literature, work, critical theory, and praxis. Now, as for Nietzsche, well, we shall see. But in earlier work, at least, Cornel West displayed, again, a generosity of spirit. More so towards Nietzsche, say, than towards some of the American philosophers that you were putting him in relationship with, particularly Quine, Goodman, Kuhn, and Rorty. You were arguing that actually Nietzsche inspired them and their approach, but by contrast to them, Nietzsche had he had understood the importance of going beyond the nihilism that was reflected in their critiques of foundationalism. And so in that work, you propose that Nietzsche actually had the right idea that we have to go beyond the nihilism to supplement with what you say, a new worldview, a new counter movement to overcome such nihilism and skepticism. And so there was a searing critique of the American philosophers at the time for not actually proposing something that you, in your whole life and praxis, are always about, right? Proposing some new values, something positive to move forward. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what those new values could be this evening, because what we want to do is put that conversation, the conversation between Nietzsche responding to Hegel, moving forward, and Foucault picking up on Nietzsche, responding to Hegel, confronting Hegel, and see basically, you know, the three questions that we're studying in this seminar, right? What work did Nietzsche and Foucault do on Hegel? Then, you know, how did that formative work of confronting Hegel actually shape their critical theory and their praxis? And then finally, and most importantly, because that's what we're here for, how does it help us today in our political crises think about what we need to do, right? So those are our questions. I can't think of a better person to address them than you, my dear Cornel. You have written about these topics. You have inspired us for decades. Everyone knows your work, your formative work, Race Matters, Democracy Matters, your memoirs, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. Of course, Dr. West is now, fortunately, right next door to us as the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at the Union Theological Seminary, having just delivered the Gifford Lectures, having just run an independent presidential campaign in 2024. It's great to have you back at 1313. Thank you.
It's a grand blessing for me, not just to be here, but to be in conversation with my dear brother Bernard. I have a very deep love for this brother. It's much deeper than Aristotelian friendship. It's brotherhood. I have great respect for his magisterial corpus. But he's the real thing, because it's not for him just a matter of academic games to be played and moves to be made in professional managerial spaces. But we were talking about you just last week. I was at Hawkins Unit in Wrightsville, right outside of Little Rock, which is the prison. And mentioned this brother's name and the work he does dealing with brothers on death row. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I see your blood sister there. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. Caroline, is that her name?
Yeah.
Caroline with her wonderful, wonderful wife. Indeed. So anytime I get a chance to talk to Brother Bernard, I know I'm going to be pushed. I'm going to be Socratized. I'm going to learn some things. And that's what we're here to do, because we're not going to engage in any kind of uncritical deference to Hegel and Nietzsche, let alone Foucault. I don't think Foucault deserves to be in that lineage in terms of the depth and profundity, but he's a very, very crucial thinker. But for me, Hegel and Nietzsche are the two most profound and powerful thinkers wrestling with historical consciousness from a philosophical point of view that connects to the legacies of Athens and the legacies of Jerusalem, let alone Rome and Paris and others in the West, and specifically Europe. But for me, I want to begin on a very existential note, which is to say that my own encounter with these towering figures was one in which I was not a blank state when I encountered them. Because I come from the chocolate side of the American empire. I come out of a black freedom movement. And so the question was always, How is it that we're so chronically hated and yet generate these love warriors every generation? And I always wanted to be part of those love warriors, Martin Kings and Fannie Lou Hamers and others. How do we wrestle with being terrorized for 400 years and call for freedom for everybody? I want to be part of that cloud of witnesses. So I come out of Shiloh Baptist Church, tied to the legacy of Martin King and others, and then the Black Panther Party that was right next door on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California, 9th Avenue, Oak Park. So I read Fanon before I read Hegel. In struggle, on the way to jail. So the philosophy of right was not the most appropriate text to take when you go into jail. Now, when I did get a chance to encounter Hegel, it was when I first got to college. We were running the Black Panther Party breakfast program and the prison program, and we decided that Fanon was making all these footnotes to Hegel. This is very, very interesting. Who is this chap? And there were some professors who were teaching Hegel, and I was blessed to be in the right place at the right time. And so I ended up studying a year with Hans-Georg Gadamer, who was teaching a course from Hegel to Heidegger at Boston College. And his student, Dietrich Henrich, first major German philosophy professor to teach at Harvard, because Harvard had no German philosophy being taught at all. I mean, you had the genius of Stanley Cavell and a few others, but they were coming at it in a very different way. Then we had Alasdair MacIntyre. He was then a flaming fiery Marxist teaching at Boston University. I got a chance to take his course on epistemological crises and narrative breakdowns. And then there was O.J.N. Finley. Remember O.J.N. Finley, the Australian brother? And he'd come in every week with his mimeograph reflections on Hegel's Science of Logic. Single space, 30 pages. It's very important. Very important, because that's a certain kind of exposure. Now, then, of course, our beloved Sheldon Wolin. You worked with Sheldon as an undergrad. I worked with the great Sheldon Wolin as my thesis advisor, along with Raymond Goyce and Walter Kaufman, the great scholar of Nietzsche and Hegel. And so once I had a chance to begin to really critically engage Hegel in all of his breadth, in all of his depth, all of the ideological conservatism, all of the bowing at the altar of the Prussian state, all of the very patriarchal conceptions of the family, let alone the deep white supremacy. And I'm never surprised when I see the giants and towering figures, deeply white supremacists. Most of them are, because white supremacy just cut that deep in the age of Europe, beginning at 1492 with the expulsion of Jews in Spain, with the encounter with the indigenous peoples in the New World, and then the end of the age of Europe in 1945 with the concentration camps, Europe imploding upon itself, and the Soviet Empire and the US Empire, for the most part, beginning to shape the world in their own image and interest. So I'm not surprised. But once I got a chance to dig deep and stroke in the lower frequencies of Hegel, it was mind-blowing, really. It really was, and that's why I take him very, very seriously. For me, especially when in teaching, I teach Hegel along with the figure who means even more to me, Georg Lukács. I think anytime you talk about Hegel in the 20th century, you've got to talk about history and class consciousness. You've got to talk about Lukács and Lukács' impact in the shaping of how we wrestle with historical consciousness. Think of Fred Jameson, who was my dear brother. We miss him, the greatest Marxist literary critic, in many ways flowing directly out of Lukács, Political Unconscious and other classic texts. Stanley Aronowitz. I say his name, I almost had to pause because he's like an uncle to me. We talk about Lukács night, day, so that Hegel as the backdrop, other than Vico, the first major European philosopher who takes seriously Geschichtlichkeit, what it means to be in space and time, and try to think of ways in which subjects and individuals are shaped by structures and institutions and stay alive, to keep alive the dialectical interplay between how agents can shape structures and how structures deeply shape agents, be it states, be it economies, be it academies, be it structures of feeling and structures of value, we call culture in the broadest sense. And for graduate students or undergraduate students, I was just talking with my beloved daughter. I just made it back from Princeton. She's a fourth year graduate student in the German department at Princeton. And she's magnificent and brilliant in her own way. And we're talking about the Hayden White's classic of 1973, Meta History, still the best thing ever written, on the different forms of historical consciousness and how are they constructed rhetorically, analytically. And it's Hegel, it's Nietzsche, it's Michelet, it's Burckhardt, all the major historians in 19th century Europe. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because for me, for someone who always tries to bring together the joys of Socratic engagement and prophetic witness, we're still trying to make the world a better place at such a grim and dim moment as our own, as the American empire continues to decay and decline and implode spiritually, morally, politically, economically, in its relation to what's going on in China, in Russia, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, and so on. We need to be able to try to mobilize the best of whatever traditions are available to us so that we can become the strongest forces for good, both as persons as well as collectivities tied to social movements. Now, I don't jump to that question because I think it's very important to see what Hegel and Nietzsche share, even though they seem to be so radically different. It's very important, especially for young brothers and sisters and siblings right now in the decaying professional managerial site called the university in a declining empire with big money, Wall Street, big tech, big military, politicians, legalized bribery, normalized corruption, tied to that big money, and trying to break the spirit and backs of those who are trying to raise their backs and voices and fight. What does Hegel and Nietzsche share? Synoptic vision. It's very important. Synoptic vision, meaning a sense of the whole. And one of the ways in which professional managerial classes are shaped is to shatter any sense of the whole. That's what professionalization does. It's not just a culture of conformity and complacency, but it puts you in some disciplinary slot. But you can't see the relations of forces going on because you're locked into some disciplinary slot. And the disciplinary division of knowledge in professional managerial sites like the university means more and more people have a difficult sense of what a synoptic vision really is, which means you lose a sense of history. It's dynamism, the breakthroughs, the setbacks. And that synoptic vision goes hand in hand with a synecdochic imagination. Synecdoche is a rhetorical trope having to do with what? The relation of parts and wholes, and the interdependence of the parts, and the ways in which the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. Hegel talks about it, and of course the French in the last 45 years, given the French occupation of a lot of the professional managerial minds, they talked about it in terms of shattering totality. We've got to shatter totality. That was part of the anti-Hegelian move of Althusser, of Foucault, of Derrida, and others. And they have their role to play. We can talk about that. I'm willing to be pushed on this. They do have their role to play. But at the same time, if you lose your sense of the whole, the dynamism that's required, and the way in which parts are connected, related, interdependent, intertwined with one another, then all you have is just these isolated silos, isolated departments, isolated disciplines, each one generating its own jargon for upward mobility, tenure, whatever you want to call it. And so the very notion of a quest for wisdom tied to praxis, tied to social transformation, is pushed to the margins or becomes a lifestyle choice or a progressive brand. And no matter how progressive your brand is, you can sell out in a minute if another brand comes along. I come from a tradition of a black folk. We ain't got no brand because we came here branded on barbaric slave ships and barbaric slave auctions and barbaric slave plantations. We had causes we wouldn't have lived and died for. A cause ain't a brand at all. Already been marketized, already been commodified. The last thing you need is another market strategy in the name of justice. Hegel, sense of the whole, but with a certain appropriation of Hegel in this regard. The last thing is the synthetic analysis. Analysis is still very important. It's not just description. It's not just interpretation. It's explanation too. Now for me, Marx remains the greatest social theorist coming out of the Hegelian tradition, but he's not as deep philosophically as Hegel is, because he zeroes in on particular modes of production. He zeroes in on the dynamics of political economies vis-a-vis nation states, vis-a-vis civil society, vis-a-vis lived experiences. That's a very crucial role to play, no doubt. Hegel gives you a whole broader scope that goes all the way back to the beginnings of the West. And those lectures on aesthetics, the encyclopedia. Marx doesn't have time for all of that. He's lucky to finish volume 2 of Capital. And he's got, of course, challenges that Hegel didn't have. Hegel's got this big professorial position in Berlin, and Marx is just making it the British Museum and trying to keep money alive. Thank God Engels got some money flow for him to keep his family going. So it's a different context in that regard. But it's crucial in terms of where we are now, because I cannot foresee ways in which we overcome the grimness and dimness if we're unable to generate new senses of a whole tied to dynamic historical forces that try to convince persons that bringing critique to bear is still worthwhile. And that's simply accommodating yourself to overwhelming status quos that are backed by overwhelming power and wealth is not the only alternative, no matter how it looks at the present. Now, Nietzsche is a fascinating case because Nietzsche also gives you a sense of the whole. But he's highly, highly critical of totalizing. He'll give you a sense of the whole of what the Western philosophical traditions look like. He'll give you a sense of the whole of what German culture of his day looks like. You had us read the uses and abuses of history, that early essay of his on the monumental and the antiquarian and the critical histories, and how do you learn how to remember and learn how to forget, and how do you exercise practical wisdom and phronesis to know when to remember and when to forget in order to engage and generate action so you're not debilitated and paralyzed. That's an early Nietzsche move, crucial for us today. But what Nietzsche does, and I actually had already learned this from Kierkegaard, and I read Kierkegaard on the chocolate side of town. They had a little bookmobile they sent out to black folk in Sacramento. And I read most of the books in there. They had a biography of Einstein I must have read about 3 times because they only had a few books. But one was the Journals of Kierkegaard. And it made a difference. How come? Because Kierkegaard came to terms with radical forms of skepticism resulting from historical consciousness. And that's always a crucial starting point. Anytime you wrestle with historical consciousness, you can easily slide into relativism, fatalism, radical skepticism, even where Nietzsche begins, which is nihilism. And nihilism is not some abstract discourse about meaninglessness and hopelessness. I come from a people who wrestle with nihilism fleshified, nihilism concretized. It's called the blues, where you have to come to terms with catastrophe every day. Good morning, heartache, every morning. Good morning, blues, lead belly. Autobiography, the title of Count Basie, right? Good morning, blues. And the blues ain't nothing but catastrophe, lyrically expressed, honestly confronted, and artistically transmuted into a sound that can allow you to keep going, keep on pushing, keep fighting, keep laughing, keep organizing, keep hoping. But it's on the ground. It's not nihilism in the abstract. There's nothing wrong with nihilism in the abstract. But nihilism flesh-defined is very different. You gotta learn how to love your own body. You gotta learn to believe in your own intelligence. It's been viciously attacked. You got to believe in your own beauty. It's been ugly. It's been characterized as ugly and so forth. And the pushback against that kind of nihilism, and Nietzsche's pushing all the time against nihilism as he understands it. I love that about him. Passive versus active. He can't go with his major influence, who was the great Arthur Schopenhauer, who he says Arthur Schopenhauer says a no to life. I think Nietzsche's wrong about that, but he's got his right to be wrong. He says, no, I'm going to say yes to life. But Schopenhauer's pessimism is so thick and so intense. Life is nothing but just suffering and swinging between boredom on the one hand and intense pain on the other. And the only relief maybe is a little art, and not all the kind of art. He was in love with Rossini. Went to the opera every night with his dog, Atma. He had two dogs. One died, Atma got another dog and named it Atma again. Two poodles, white and brown. That's Arthur Schopenhauer. That's Nietzsche's starting point. And for the graduate students who want to read one of the finest essays ever written about the ways in which philosophical traditions and figures can empower, you read Schopenhauer as author in those untimely meditations. Early Nietzsche. But the surprise is this, connected to skepticism. Nietzsche goes on to say there's only one writer that when I compare with Schopenhauer is even deeper. His name is Montaigne. He said, Nietzsche said that about a French moralist? You don't say. Robert Pippin and others have made this point in this great essay, the lectures of 2004 in Paris, right? Nietzsche said, the very fact that this man wrote augments the joy of living on earth. He's the mightiest and freest soul. And I say about him what he said about Plutarch. When I glance in him, I grow a leg and a wing. What was it about Montaigne that had Nietzsche so excited? Montaigne creates the essay as a genre. Test, experiment, take a risk, give up on quest for certainty, give up on quest for necessity, even give up on quest for cheap universality. Begin with your particularity and be honest enough to lay your heart, mind, soul, and history on the page. So as Emerson said about Montaigne, when you scratch these pages, you see blood. Now, as a blues man, I relate to that. Because as rich and sophisticated and subtle as intellectual discourse can be, in the end, it's got to be what Samuel Beckett called grounded in the mess, or what I would call the funk of history, of our own lives, our own struggles, our blood, sweat, and tears, our wounds, our bruises, and how do you transfigure those into ways of living based on mobilizing the best of the past, intervening in the present. Now, Nietzsche's politics, we know, of course, are always nothing to have high expectations about. He hardly has a politics at all because it has very little conception of any kind of Gemeinschaft, any kind of conception of community at all. He's concerned about greatness, he's concerned about genius, he's concerned about himself, and he's concerned about generating powers in other peoples who themselves will become great vis-a-vis the herd. Elitist, aristocratic, a whole host of things. I don't hold my breath when it comes to Nietzsche on politics. Not at all. What I love about him is, and this is crucial, especially for freedom fighters, is his intellectual integrity, intellectual conscience. He says, I have one main mentor, Heraclitus. How come? Heraclitus says, character is destiny. Everything flows. War is the father of all. That's why Nietzsche says, read Thucydides before you read Plato. Read Clausewitz, the philosopher of war, before you read Hegel. That's Nietzsche. That's very useful today. Because the history of the world is so often the history of empires, with wars, external and internal, and viewing human beings just as objects to be manipulated, commodities to be exploited, to generate militaristic, adventurous projects abroad, and trying to convince the citizens to wave their flags and to participate in them. Nietzsche is very important. And it's sad in a way. I remember even when I used to raise this question when I was at Princeton, how come we don't have courses on war in philosophy departments? Well, we touch on it in international relations. I see. So you can understand the making of America without the war against indigenous people, without the war against Mormons, without the Civil War, without the war against Britain, all the way up to present day. We've got 7 wars going on at the same time. When the gangster in the White House said he'd serve 8. Okay, all right. Get out the crack pipe. Shows just how far removed one can be in dealing with forms of nihilism, with the backdrop of various kinds of wars, and the ways in which they shape and mold our perceptions and our practices, and the ways in which they can break our spirits, or the ways in which they may even, at times, buoy us up. And so, I don't want to go on too long on this because I want to spend much more time in dialogue. But for me, Hegel on the one hand, Lukács, and see, when you think about Lukács, just keep in mind Zimmel and Weber. But Hegel didn't have access to. Rationalizations of Weber, bureaucratizations of Weber, forms of domination. And then with Zimmel's philosophy of money. Objectification, commodification. And Lukács, in his reification essay, brings all together. But it's in a Hegelian framework. And there's no way that we could come to terms with our present day crisis without talking about commodification on steroids, militarization running amok, and the ways in which objectification, be it white supremacists, male supremacists, be it homophobic, be it transphobic, reducing rich human beings simply to objects to be manipulated or defamed, vilified, demonized, or whatever. And then there's always not just resistance, but with Hegel and with Nietzsche, anytime you think of any discourse of resistance, if you're not talking about remembrance, back to use and abuse of history, back to Toni Morrison's Beloved and so many other texts. You're not talking about reverence, something beyond your tribe, something beyond your own ego. And remembrance and reverence go hand in hand with ways in which resistance can have both moral substance, can have spiritual depth, can have a certain kind of political vision, even though it tends to be crushed. Hegel does say that history is what? Slaughter bench.
Of history.
History is a slaughter bench. That's what it is. For Nietzsche, Nietzsche says, I exalt and revel in the very thing Hegel hates. And what does Hegel hate more than anything else? Contingency. He's so tied to necessity. He's got to work out Vernunft, that listy Vernunft, that cunning of reason. He's got to show the necessity tied to the universality that results in the end product of his philosophic Weltanschauung, his philosophic worldview. Nietzsche says, no, it's contingent all the way down, Georg. All the way down, sorry about that. And with Foucault, what I love about Foucault, of course, is that in many ways, he builds on wrestling with radical contingency and looking about ways in which we can mobilize other kinds of counter contingencies to sustain some kinds of resistance. I remember Talcott Parsons, my old teacher, leading American sociologist way back in the 20th century. You remember Brother Talcott? Mm-hmm. Talcott was quite a figure. He wrote a dissertation under Max Weber's brother, Alfred Weber, University of Heidelberg. And he saw me read my Foucault, and he looked at it. He said, oh, I've read that in the French. He said, that's an interesting footnote to Weber. He's going to be preoccupied with disciplinary practices. He's going to be preoccupied with power and knowledge. Crucial, but we've been there before. Well, a lot of young folk, really? I thought Foucault was the deepest thing going on. No, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Foucault writes on who as a young man? Hegel. Mm-hmm. Then he's a dialectical materialist for a while. Was a member of the Communist Party. Flat as a pancake. Then he reads Nietzsche, wrestling with gay identity. And of course, for him, Deleuze changes his life. I mean, when he came to New York, and he said, we live in the age of Deleuze. 95% of the crowd said, who the hell is Deleuze? Because Deleuze never came to America, never, hardly translated at that time. I was blessed when I taught at Saint-Denis in Paris in 1987 to have an office right next to Daniel Defer, who was Foucault's companion for many years. He's a major philosopher in his own right. And they kept talking about Deleuze because Deleuze was on the faculty. So we went in, sat in on Deleuze's courses and so forth, sat in on the last course he ever had. He gave a lecture on Leibniz's notion of event. He had those long fingernails and chain smoker and so forth. Long, beautiful hair, like he was singing with the Dramatics or something. And he was quite a figure, but he didn't have the authority to many of us that he had in France. So when Foucault came, Foucault didn't have the same authority until another generation of the literary critics began to pick him up. And he's been crucial in some ways with me, but he's never had the same authority to me that he's had for most literary critics and others as part of my critiques of Foucault in terms of fetishizing discourses as if there's no such thing that deeper than discourse or beyond discourse with not just bodies but also in music, and how do you connect melodies to discourse, because I come out of a musical tradition. Those things he had very little interest in. And I already knew, I said, oh, he got some real shortcomings here, but everybody's talking about power knowledge. I see. Yes, I agree. Power knowledge is very important. But in terms of where we are now, I'm open to any of your views, critiques, commentary, or making me uncomfortable, because I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. I'm not a relativist, but I know that I could be wrong. But let me stop there and open it up for questions.
All right, thanks. Well, first, thanks. All right, well, I was taking copious notes because you covered a lot of ground. And let me just say that one of the, probably for this seminar, one of the most powerful pieces of what you were saying is that to overcome, here's what I remember, to overcome kind of the grimness and the dimness of our situation today. We need a new sense of the whole,
Yes, yes.
which includes, importantly, right, critique. So the power of negative thinking to help shape a new horizon.
Absolutely.
Okay, and this ties really beautifully to last week's session on Marcuse, right? Because he too was arguing for the need for negative thinking and the power of negative thinking.
And the dialogue you had with Sister Shelley Benhabib was a marvelous dialogue. I listened to it late into the night.
Yeah.
But it was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of these dialogues are not worth it when it gets that late. You know? But yours certainly was, having to do with Marcuse and Benhabib's great legacy.
Yeah. And so I think that's really important. And then I'm gonna come back to this idea of kind of civil war as being a matrix of social relations, which I think is really also important in understanding the present. The questions of commodification and just commodification, pure and simple, and the way in which it is shaping our present and making it so difficult to even have an imagination of a different world, right? And then the role of contingency, and that was one of the, it's such a, I was just as I was rereading some of these lectures in preparation for tonight, the way in which Hegel speaks about getting rid of contingency is just striking, right? I mean, that is his overall, the most important thing is just to, it's in the lectures on history, is just to get rid of contingency.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And so what is the role then of contingency? So I want to offer you, though, a slightly different genealogy, maybe.
Sure.
Okay. And it does include Foucault in it, and it ends in extraordinary work. I was thinking, as I was preparing for this seminar, I was thinking of Angela Davis's work, her most recent, or one of the most recent books, Angela Davis, Gina Dent, Erica Miners, and Beth Ritchie on Abolition, Feminism Now. Because I was thinking of it as maybe the best illustration for us right now of a positive vision with new values going to present us with a vision of a horizon, a positive horizon. But it is a product of, in their words, a critical genealogy, they say, right? A critical genealogy. So, I want to use this as an example of work that actually is the outcome of our seminar readings, in a way. All right? And when they write, we frame this book as a critical genealogy rather than a manifesto, okay? One that emphasizes how important it is to trace political lineages. Our work proceeds genealogically to address subjugated histories of organizing that must inform and strengthen our present mobilizations, right? So here's work that is all about mobilization and praxis. And yet it is presented philosophically as what's called a critical genealogy. And to a certain extent, I don't think that you could get to this point of this kind of a critical genealogy without having had first Nietzsche's kind of confrontation with Hegel, and then Foucault's confrontation with Nietzsche, that at a certain point in time, maybe not during all of, so, I think you have to think about these folks at different periods, but certainly in the period where you were at Vincennes, where he was at Vincennes, 1968, 69, 70, 71, 72, was a formative period where his confrontation with Nietzsche actually makes possible, I would argue, this kind of work, or at least, well, not makes possible, because this kind of work stands on its own, but is connected. Connected. Okay. All right. And so this genealogy would start first, of course, with Nietzsche's confrontation with Hegel, and so just I tried to set out in the little introduction that you can read later, or whatever, the texts and the words, just so that you have access to the exact places where Nietzsche is directly confronting Hegel, specifically calling him out, right? Calling him out as actually the worst thing that you could have done to history. Right? The use of history here paralyzes us, right? He says, and that's in the uses and abuses. It paralyzes us because it's got this vision that we ultimately achieve, we ultimately arrive at this late stage in history at 1820, 1821, the Prussian bureaucracy. We arrive at this late stage, and of course there are many Hegels, as we know, right? There's a far more revolutionary Hegel. I mean, from the phenomenology of spirit, that was all about continual transformation, self-consciousness, a Hegel that actually you write about and that you embrace, and that is, absolutely. Right? But that's not really the Hegel that Nietzsche is targeting. Nietzsche is targeting a different Hegel, much more of the philosophy of right Hegel, the history which is in there. It's published at the end of that text, right? And he goes against it and says this is detrimental to life, and that's what he cares about: life, activity, vitality, right? So it's detrimental to life because it locks us in these stories where we then become pacified, content. Like we're and you can think about that today, right? In terms of how visions of history can render people kind of self-content and believing that they are, at the culmination of history in a time right now when it's clear that we're at some massive juncture of a change in overall spirit. But in any event, so that first kind of confrontation, between Nietzsche and Hegel then creates the possibilities of these contingencies and thinking about history in a different way, right? Thinking through these genealogies. Of course, now Nietzsche then, and as you rightly said, right? I mean, the values that he then privileges of the aristocratic, the noble, the hierarchy, the inequality. I mean, it's hard to digest. Right? It's hard to digest. But
he's just wrong. He's just wrong. But he has the right to be wrong. I mean, that's who he is.
That was who he is.
He's not Marx. He's Nietzsche.
Right. Exactly.
And he's just wrong on certain things, and he's insightful on others.
Right.
And he's irrelevant on others. Right. And he's indispensable on others.
Right.
And you see, when you historicize, be a figure or a movement or any civilization or empire, you always contextualize, you always pluralize, and you always humanize. You see, so when we talk about Nietzsche, there's a lot of different Nietzsches. Mm-hmm. There's a Nietzsche tied to Schopenhauer. He rejects the author Schopenhauer. There's a Nietzsche tied to Wagner. He rejects Wagner. There's a Nietzsche tied to science. He rejects science. There's a Nietzsche tied to illusion. Some are enabling, some are disenabling. He rejects that. Where do you end up, Nietzsche, before you go mad? He's on the move.
Right.
In that sense, he's like a jazz woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's on the move. She don't sing the songs the same way. She's in different contexts. She's in different moods. That's who Nietzsche is. Hegel's the same way.
Right.
You mentioned, so in Marx is the same way. The manuscripts versus the central Marx, 18th Brumaire, German ideology, different than Capital and the Grundrisse. That's true for all of us. So in that sense, when you historicize in a serious way, I'm talking about historicize in such a way where it hurts. Not some academic gesture. Because one of the things about Nietzsche says what? I don't have simply the courage of my convictions, I have the courage to attack my conventions. There's a certain intellectual sadism about Nietzsche. He finds out what is most precious inside of him, and that's the very thing he attacks most intensely. He's a lapsed Lutheran. Seriously. 6 generations of Lutheran pastors. What does that mean? It means he's obsessed with the relation of time and eternity, the cross, the theology of the cross of Martin Luther, and he's obsessed with Beruf, Weber's vocation, which means he's going to put everything inside of him, inside of his calling, even as he's changing. That's Nietzsche. That's lapsed Lutheranism. You're not going to get too many Baptists and Presbyterians and Pentecostals obsessed with that kind of Beruf. They might be obsessed with spirit, third person. They might be obsessed with trying to evangelize and so forth and so on. It's a different kind of framework. Hegel also was a lapsed Lutheran. And the level of calling that he has and the unbelievable prolific production has something to do with how he spends his time and energy in relation to his calling. And he's changing all the time, just like us. But I'm sorry.
No, that was helpful. That was helpful.
I think it's important to keep in mind in talking about the, and Foucault too.
Right.
I mean, the lady Foucault talking about self,
Foucault.
the care of the self.
Right.
Oh my God.
Right. Well, let me get there.
It could be George Santa Anna or somebody. Michelle, what happened to prison revolution, man? Well, he's a different brother.
All right. So, different periods. I want to go now to the Foucault of 1969. Okay.
That's good Foucault right there.
Okay, right there.
Yes.
Because you couldn't do the work, I think, the genealogical work necessarily just with the Nietzsche at this point, just with the genealogy of morals. I mean, I do a lot of work with the genealogy of morals. We're gonna do a lot of work tomorrow.
Powerful text.
Tomorrow on the genealogy of morals, and when we're studying punishment theory. It's some of the greatest passages on punishment theory. But there are problems because it's not clear where the genealogy is leading, right? The genealogy is leading to this notion of a slave morality and prevailing over the master, the noble morality, which he seems to favor. It's hard stuff to kind of orient politically in our direction, let's say, right?
Absolutely.
So 1969.
Envy and resentment.
Right.
You got to keep track of the envy and resentment
sure.
inside of him.
For sure. Yeah.
Because his critique's powerful.
Yeah.
But he's got to situate himself also in relation to it.
Right.
So why does he feel he has to side with the strong when he knows he's sick every day and the headaches and the migraines and barely able to get up in the morning?
Right.
And then read Lou Salome's book on Nietzsche. And he's down on his knees asking the sister to get married. And what if she had said yes? It would have been a different Nietzsche.
Possibly.
And I'm not reducing it to biography, but what I'm saying is that these relative contexts in people's lives and the projections that's going on and the intellectual power that he has in critiques of Judaism, Christianity, and socialism and democracy. And then he's got his own resentments. He's got his own wrestling with weakness. He's got his own senses that he's trying to push aside like any other great thinker. And that has to be part and parcel of the dialogue. When you come at Nietzsche, or it looks as if he's some kind of spectator with a critique, rather than in the muck and mire like everybody else with a perspective. That's just a footnote again, though, brother.
All right. So we're now 1969. We're at Vincennes, where you were. Foucault is appointed professor of philosophy. He gets to hire all kinds of
Paul
folks.
Ricoeur is the dean.
Yeah.
Our dear brother Paul Ricoeur.
Right.
Huguenot, Protestant in
and
France.
he hires Jacques Rancière, who's a Maoist.
Yes, he
and
does.
So these are the courses that they then teach. They're about 10 courses for the philosophy department in Vincennes.
Right.
Jacques Rancière teaches a course on theories of the second step of Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism. So that's one course he teaches. So he teaches a course on Stalinism. He hires Alain Badiou.
Oh, yeah, he's my dear brother.
Okay,
I've had many debates with him. He wears white
also,
suits like Mark Twain and Tom Wolfe.
Yeah. So communist, his lectures are on the Marxist dialectic and the science in the class struggle. He hires Judith Miller, another famous intellectual at the time, who teaches the third step of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and problems concerning ideology. He hires Henri Weber, who's actually hired because to even out a little bit, there were too many Maoists. So he hires one Trotskyist, Henri Weber, and he teaches Introduction to Marxism of the 20th Century, Lenin, Trotsky, and the Bolshevik Current, as well as another course on the writings of Mao Zedong. And then also to even out, because really there's just too many Maoists, now we got a Trotskyist, so, and then he hires Etienne Balibar, our beloved Etienne Balibar, who was a member of the Communist Party at the time. So we needed to add the Communist Party. And Balibar would then teach, as the course he would teach, well, okay, another course on Marxism and social science. Now, no courses on decolonization. That has not entered at all. That has not entered at all.
The most important historical process in the catastrophic 20th century.
Right.
But I mean, I'm glad they taught those courses, but they needed to.
Yeah, they need to diversify. Now,
absolutely.
Foucault then, in this kind of choice here, with all those other courses, decides to teach Nietzsche. It kind of sticks out
that's true.
Wow,
that's true.
Right? Like, what is that about? You know, you look at this course catalog. Those are all the course catalogs. Here, this is the course catalog from Vincennes from 69-70.
Critique and thought. It's speculative.
Yeah. And then Nietzsche. And what is he doing going to Nietzsche? Well,
yes.
He's going to Nietzsche, and he's going to Nietzsche because Nietzsche is the one who on his reading, right, allows him to go precisely to these questions of war and conflict. The genealogy is a matter of inheritance. It's the battles over inheritance, right? What is genealogy about? It's all people fighting over, right? Over claiming the wealth, claiming the ties, claiming the links and whatnot. And as a result of that work, he then kind of starts to work in a tradition of Nietzschean genealogy. Actually, I mean, so like the thrust of his lecture at Vincennes is the following. We're at the period of revolutionary strategy, he says. A period where sorry, I'm translating here. It is the period, what we are is not to understand the forms of spiritual totalities or the forms of transcendental destination that is for the entire West. Of course, he's talking about Hegel right there. But to understand and disperse the arbitrary systems that are forms of domination. Okay? So the idea here is to actually get at these forms of domination and contingency. And ultimately, this leads him to a genealogy, right? The genealogy that interests him at the time, and he's part of the Groupe d'Information sur les Prisons, this prisons information abolition group, it gives birth to, Discipline and Punish, I take it. And so Discipline and Punish then becomes a genealogy that we can use, actually. A genealogy that we can use in our political struggles. I mean, I don't think we could have used Nietzsche's genealogy necessarily in our political struggles. But Foucault's genealogy we can use, right? We can use it. I mean, what is he trying to show? He's trying to show actually a history of what he calls the carceral archipelago, right? Archipel carcéral, the carceral archipelago, right? That we live in the West, which of course a genealogy that shows us the ways in which we have kind of created these disciplinary procedures. This is 1970, he published this in 75. This is even before mass incarceration in this country, right? But he's seeing it when he goes to Attica, he sees it in the Attica, whatever. But it becomes a genealogy that we can use. And it becomes a genealogy that shows us how we can do this work and shows us how it can inform our practice. Now, to the point where today, I think most people talk about when they're doing this kind of work, they're doing genealogies, they're not doing histories anymore. We don't say we do history anymore, we do genealogies. Now everybody does genealogy. If you do a history, you're like flat-footed, right? You don't do history. I mean, no one with a critical edge does any history anymore. They do genealogies, right? Okay. But then that takes us then a little bit back to Nietzsche, but it gives us this idea that, well, maybe we can start thinking about what is a productive, critical genealogy. And I think Discipline and Punish was one, although it was aimed at the repression. Another one, though,
and downplayed any utopian projection. It was over against. It was a great refusal of Marcuse. It was not an attempt to provide a utopian projection that could inform certain kind of practice. Because for me, part of the problem here is that I've always felt that our French brothers and sisters and siblings have much to contribute, but they have a certain kind of intellectual parochialism and provincialism that needs to be accented here. You see, when you're in France and you get shaped in the high schools, you get thick injections of Cartesianism. Descartes sits at the very center of your conception of philosophical reflection, which means you begin with epistemic subjects. And if you really want to get radical, you go to Spinoza. Oh my God. That's Deleuze. And here's a wonderful book on Spinoza, you see. Because he's got substances. And then Hegel's got substance as subject in the preface to Phenomenology. But you're still obsessed with subjects, epistemic subjects, or Kantian transcendental subjects. Now, Hegel seems radical because you've got forms of Geist in time. That's what history, that's his definition of history, right? So that, and I noticed this at Saint-Denis, because when I got there, I'm trying to teach philosophy. Most of the text never even translated. There's hardly any Dewey. And that was Derrida who translated Dewey because Foucault asked him to, making his trips to Tunisia. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means then that even Foucault, and this is part of my critique of Foucault, he says Foucault is so obsessed with subject constitution, the way subjects are constituted, because it's still a subject-centered discourse. Whereas if you begin with sociality, intersubjectivity, even Dewey begins with intersubjectivity, so does Marx, so does Wittgenstein, so does a Nazi named Heidegger. Dasein already has been constituted by something outside. So it's not isolated epistemic subjects trying to make emphasis about the external world with objects and so forth, or transcendental ones in Kant. And it's pre-Darwinian. Because of course with Dewey, there's no subjects. It's like in Whitehead, no subjects. Wittgenstein, no subjects at all. Just organisms transacting and interacting with environments, with various language games and forms of life that help you get about. So you don't begin with a subject and then you have a problem of external worlds and other minds. You don't begin with a subject and have to deal with certain kind of epistemic forms of skepticism. It's a very different move. That's the difference between Dewey and James and Peirce and Rorty and most of the French, not all, but most of the French. Now, am I being unfair with my French brothers and sisters in terms of the Cartesian shadows casted as they attempt to move? And you say, oh, good God, if I begin with Descartes, it looks kind of transgressive, yes, but if I don't begin with Descartes, it's not as transgressive as they think. And if that's the case, then it's not going to be just a matter of the conditions under which subjects are constituted in terms of genealogical practice, because you're still talking about the constitution of subjects. We're organisms. Of course we're shaped by antecedent practices. Of course we're shaped by families and civic society and culture and class and imperial positions and so forth and so on. That's what history and genealogy, in its best sense, is all about. Now, I might be going too far. What you think, though, brother?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Already. Well, you tell me how I'm going too far, my brother.
Well, there's no doubt that there's a disciplinary educational system in France that has a way of imposing certain kind of certain restrictions, at least on young thinkers. But I think if you look at the radical work of someone like Gilles Deleuze and Guattari in their work on, the anti-Oedipus or Emile Plateau, I think you've gone pretty far away from a kind of limited kind of, Descartesian,
He writes on Whitehead, he writes on...
Right, yeah. But I think I still will abide by the claim that without the Foucauldian genealogical work, I don't think that we would have pushed genealogy into a critical political space. I think it was that work that took the Nietzschean genealogy and converted it into something that could be politically useful. And that's where when you end now, I would put Angela Davis in this trajectory. Although actually Angela Davis, we were having a fascinating conversation. We've got someone here who actually is written a dissertation on Angela, particularly in the Frankfurt School, and is making the point. Don't see my student
they
right
need
now.
To stand up.
Okay, no.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
I want to.
But and emphasizing the way in which actually Angela Davis, I agree entirely with this. This is, I think, what we were trying to say when we were talking about her, is the second generation of the Frankfurt School, rather than Habermas. Angela Davis and Krall are the second generation of the Frankfurt School. But in any event, here the point is that this idea of a critical genealogy is it seems to me is in that trajectory and makes sense that way. When they write, right, because as a co-author, narrating a history of the present ecosystem, attending to subjugated knowledges and erasures, not only gestures to the underlying strata of necessary collective labor, but also provides key imaginative conceptual tools to engage with our own contemporary moment. I think this is influenced by that, and I think that the whole abolitionist movement today was influenced by this idea at the heart of Discipline and Punish, that the prison was born with reform. Right? That the prison and reform are necessary for each other. That the idea of reforming the prison, say, is what keeps the prison alive. Right? All of those arguments that are part of the abolitionist movement today, I think, traces to that genealogical work that was done in the 1970s by someone in France looking at French prisons. Right? He wasn't studying prisons elsewhere. He wasn't studying the United States. He wasn't studying American history. He was looking specifically at the creation of disciplinary prisons in France, of Maître, this juvenile facility, which actually was where Jean Genet was was incarcerated as a youth and for years, Maitreyi, but at the way in which Maitreyi kind of like got into people's, subjectivity, shaped their soul, disciplined them. Now, I mean, it's true. Weber talked about discipline too. There are a lot of Weber and Foucault. There's a lot in common, and Weber spoke about discipline in that way as well. Right?
That was the point that Talcott Parsons was making, who translated. Weber's work in the English very much so. But in Angela's case, and in the discourse that she's talking about in terms of both feminists as well as womanists, I would grant you the point that the political uses of of genealogy played a role, and I would even think it played a very important role in the discourses of the academy, which is very important. I'm not downplaying it, but I think, remember, Angela writes a 500-page book on blues women, right? Before that. And when she teaches at UCLA, who does she first lecture on? Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and in relation to Marcuse, Horkheimer, and Adorno. So she is that second generation figure coming out of the Frankfurt School. But she from Gut Bucket Jim Crow, Birmingham. One of her good friends was blown up in that 16th Street Baptist Church when those cowardly white supremacists bombed those black girls in Sunday school. And she's grounded in a freedom tradition whose center has always been the abolition of slavery, the abolition of Jim Crow, the abolition of poverty, the abolition of predatory capitalist practices, the abolition of imperial subjugation. And that abolition overlaps with the power of negative thinking that you could get in a Marcuse, be it the 1941 text, Reason and Revolution, all the way up to his essay on liberation. Of course, she's a student of Marcuse, wonderful relation and so forth. But she has she's a composite. She's a hybrid. Oh, yeah. She's pulling from different traditions.
Right. And
all of those traditions are connected and articulated in such a way that we get the Angela Davis that she is now. Yeah. Now, I mean, I'm got my own critiques of where she is now, but that's another issue right now. But she's my sister, don't you know? You know, I'm blessed to write introduction to her powerful text on freedom and as a constant struggle in Palestine, Ferguson, and so forth. But she's got a number of these different factors and elements. You're accenting a crucial one, and there's others.
I mean, I think you're entirely right that, for instance, in that particular case, Du Bois and the whole notion of abolition democracy plays a much, probably a more important role, right?
That's
more important role.
Yes,
But I'm trying to kind of think of, there are multiple genealogies, multiple forces that converge and not converge, but I'm kind of trying to draw one of them,
right?
Particularly because I'm interested in how we can use these terms, right? Today, how do they help us today, right? That's the only thing that matters, right? It's like, how can we think about how what Nietzsche did to Hegel, and the reason we're coming back to what people did to Hegel is because so many people turned to him at such critical junctures of their own intellectual lives and political lives, right? What they did, how that can help us. And I think this is one place where you see how it can actually generate something. It was the turning into genealogy, but then it had to be the case that those genealogies needed to be, refined in a certain way. Looking, for instance, at here, this is a genealogy of social movement, right? Which is very different than the kind of genealogy that, might not be that different than some of the Nietzsche stuff, but it's certainly different than other genealogies, which are often genealogies of oppression, right? Which are equally important unless they become oppressive in themselves. Right?
Absolutely.
So we have to think about how we do these genealogies in a way, in a Nietzschean way, how we do these genealogies for life, for the present moment, to help us get out of this crisis, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
But I think one of the things, I know we open up for
and we're going to
dialogue,
open it up.
is that there's a sense in which for Nietzsche, he's actually very traditional, going all the way back to Plato in terms of soul craft and character formation. That Nietzsche is obsessed with the Stoic virtue of courage, not a Christian virtue, not a Judaic virtue. Justice, 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 thou shalt. Courage. Think for yourself. Courage. Be on the edge of the cliff. Courage to look the abyss in the eye. Courage to wrestle with absurdity. Courage. And I think that's very important because there's different forms of courage. But without courage, all the other virtues are empty. They're vacuous, they're shallow, they're hollow. You can talk about them until the cows come home. That's what I meant when I talk about you, the real thing. Right. We in the foxhole together. Now, we're in the foxhole. We ain't having Foucault versus Kierkegaard. You know, I'm taking bullets for you, you taking bullets for me. There's a certain kind of courage. And that coming together is not unanimity ideologically or politically. It's I can trust the brother. I trust Stanley Ronald with. I trust certain folk. I trust. That's very important. And for Nietzsche, he believes part of the decadence of the West is precisely the degree to which courage is so sparse. And this is in the 1870s. The German nation has just been unified under Bismarck. He's mad by 89? He's dead by 1900. He's rediscovered partly because the academy lacked intellectual integrity and courage, and he became a major figure outside of the academy for people who were serious about thinking about themselves and the world. And we're in a moment now where there's just not enough courage. Too much spinelessness. Amen. People run around scared, intimidated, selling out, caving in, giving up. Hey, we need a crypto-Nietzschean moment. I say crypto because his conception of courage is too elitist, too tied to a number of narrow things. But a broader sense of courage in which you look whatever darkness in the face and say, our movement has the chance of a snowball in hell at the moment. But we're going to fight with the same level of intensity and integrity anyway. Because we fight for integrity and courage and for people who are suffering, even if it doesn't look like we can win. And if you just want to be a spectator and do your little utilitarian calculus, well, it doesn't look good, so I better go off to the mainstream. Hey, that's part of Nietzsche's point. In the end, you were spineless. That's an important challenge. Even Heidegger, as wrong as he is on Nietzsche, he identifies with Nietzsche's courage. You know what I mean? Last metaphysician, quit lying, Martin. Wrong as he can be. But he knows he wants to be a thinker of courage, even given his Nazi subordination to the gangster activity in Germany.
Very relevant for today. Very relevant. All right, so let's open it up for some questions. Uzma, you want to start us off, or you want to start us off?
I don't have a question right now.
Oh, you want to start us off? Go, it's on. Go for it.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question, and then I'm going to give a metaphor, and then I'm going to ask the question again. The metaphor is not mine. It's a metaphor of Professor Harcourt.
Beautiful.
The question is, who do we trust to tell us what is real? And this might be like a simplification of Hegel, but this idea of only what is real is rational, and only what is rational is real, right? And I think at the root of that, you look first at what is real. And I don't think that's always an easy question. And the person we're supposed to trust is the writers of genealogies, right, which are the children of the institution. And Professor Harcourt gives us this metaphor. Think of Hegel as moving towards absolute freedom, right? What is freedom? And he talks about the grocery store, right? And there's a foolishness in thinking, oh my God, I have so much freedom in the grocery store. This is awesome. I can buy whatever I want in the grocery store, when everything in the store has been placed to manipulate you and paid for by food corporations. It's a limited picture, right? And then I don't know how we get out of the grocery store, and I don't even know where the limits of the grocery store are. And if we can't trust the institution because they don't practice, who do we trust to tell us what is real?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I mean, I began with my own deep appreciation of the profundity of Hegel, but I don't think Hegel's right. I don't think reality is rational. I don't think Vernunft triumphs at all. I'm closer to Chekhov and Beckett on that. Very much so. A conception of reason and rationality can have liberatory effects. That's why the best of the Frankfurt School, even given its own blindnesses and so forth, is still noteworthy. That's why Angela is still so important, both as Conrad as well as a critical interlocutor and so forth. But I don't proceed with the real being rational, or the rationality itself being in any way real. I think that it's just so messy, the incongruity of being human and the levels of organized greed and weaponized hatred and institutionalized cruelty and routinized indifference, and we can go on and on. I mean, when Hegel says it's a slaughter bench, but I'm going to come in and show you the rational patterns, I agree with the slaughter bench. He's right. Gibbon says human history ain't nothing but just a register of human crimes and follies, after he writes Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. But he's a cynic. He just ends just like that. Right? I'm going to be a spectator. I'm going to show you the spectacle, and all you can do is just smile and laugh or whatever, because that's how wretched human beings are. Sounds like the late Mark Twain, that damn human race, or Jonathan Swift, or Rabelais, in a certain sense. I'm closer to them, but at the same time, I do believe that that love and empathy and compassion and solidarity and integrity are worth holding on to, whether people think the reality is real or rationality is tied to reality. So in that sense, it's a kind of leap that one makes, almost a Kierkegaardian leap that one makes in one's life and in one's struggle. I hope I got at some of your questions. I didn't get to the grocery store. I didn't get to the grocery store. But the grocery store itself, of course, is a particular manifestation of the way in which markets flow now vis-a-vis oligopolies, monopolies, unaccountable, tied to grotesque wealth, inequality that make it difficult for there to be public discourses that are critical of their monopoly status. And of course, that's the role of what used to be the left, or even used to be socialism. I mean, even my dear brother, Soran, who I have great respect for and so forth, but if people think that that democratic socialism is about buses running faster and free, and kindergartens available, and rent control. I mean, that's New Deal robust liberalism, but that's not socialism. Socialism shatters the monopolies and the oligopolies. That's what Debs ran on. Now, Bernie Sanders didn't run on it because Bernie's a good social democrat in love with Debs. And I love Bernie. I've 2 campaigns with him and so, but he and I talked about it every night. Now, you know that wasn't socialism, brother. But it's the best we can do at the moment, so let's just push it. Oh, I agree. And I've never met so around, but I tell him the same thing. Even though in his case, I'd go a little bit further, though. You see, when he talks about America being a nation of immigrants, I say, get off the crack pipe, brother. We used to present that argument against Oscar Hanlon at Harvard when he wrote that book, Uprooted, his classic of 1951. He used to start his lectures, America is a nation of immigrants. I said, Oscar, for you, not for indigenous peoples, not for enslaved folk who created the very economic foundation for the nation that allowed you to get here. So yes, the immigrants are crucial, indispensable, fundamental in a number of different ways, but don't reduce the nation to just immigrants. You're gonna miss out on a whole lot of the shaping and molding of the empire now and then. And Professor Hanlon would say, oh, you all must be Marxists. And you know what I would say? No, I'm Christian. That really got to mess him up, but we had wonderful dialogues with Brother Oscar. But there's this tendency now because of our precious immigrants being so viciously attacked, and we do have to be in solidarity and defend with the secret army and the private police of ICE and so forth. That's what we ran for, the abolition of ICE. But it's easy to fall into a settler mentality if your social base is primarily immigrants who just got here, especially those who got here after 1965 as a result of the Black freedom movement that pushed back white supremacist immigration practices. Amen. Mm-hmm. You see? And if you have a settler mentality, you can easily fall into a gentrifier sensibility of the very folks who've been pushed out of the city that your gentrifiers came into, that serve as part of the social base of your socialism. And you have to be Hegelian enough to have a sense of the whole. And you got to be Nietzschean enough to have the courage to tell the truth. You got to be jazz-like enough to embrace Soran and say, I know they're coming at you tooth and nail, I'm in solidarity with you, but you got to give up on this language because you're not telling the full truth. I know that wasn't part of your question. But
well, kind of.
There is a connection, absolutely.
All right, I got a question over here.
Good morning. I'm sorry. I worked a lot of shifts. It's good evening. So my question is, it's funny that you spoke about courage because I'm actually advocating for COPA, which is the Community Opportunity Purchase Act, so we could buy properties instead of big corp LLCs. And so right now I'm in the process of figuring out how to bring back homesteading, taking over vacant buildings in Harlem, all over. How do you teach courage to those that, like you said, are trapped in the colonizer mentality? Because I'm ready to burn it down. Like, I'm ready to go do a citizen's arrest and go arrest Trump myself. So how do I get other people to have that same courage with me to, forgive my language, burn this motherfucker to the ground?
Well, let me grab that one on that one. No, I deeply identify with your spirit, your geist, your esprit. Now, in terms of strategy and tactic, that's another thing. But I want to say this, though. Yes. That's right.
Those that are enjoying my Harlem,
yeah.
Right? I'm on a train, and I have to deal with that anger of saying, all you white people was not here when it was crack all over the place and this and that, right? But I have the courage to those emotions. So like you said, it's a lot. But go ahead, brother.
No, but no, I appreciate that quote. Well, one thing is, and I love my dear brother Bernard's book on cooperative society and mutual aid societies, because you would have to be able to create public spaces of relative autonomy based on bonds of trust so that it's not circumscribed by simply the market. And by the market these days, you're talking about, again, monopolies, oligopolies, private equity companies, yes, pushing people around like they pawns on a chessboard and so forth.
Wall Street, the L&Ms, the Bluestones, the Triangle Equities, the Columbia University.
Oh, Lord, Columbia.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, too, and there's a wonderful line in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, where he says examples are the go-kart of judgment. You remember that line? Well, I noticed you got that Norman Kemp Smith critique of
in
the English translation. Examples are the go-kart of judgment. People have to see examples, not just isolated individuals, but groups of people who are trying to create forms of efficacy on the ground, no matter how small, but levels of perseverance and persistence tied to integrity, like yourself, cutting against the grain. Cutting against the grain. We had tons of struggles in Brooklyn with the stadium and so forth. What did they do? They came in and got black preachers and got Jay-Z telling everybody he got 15% of the thing. He had 0.15%. There is a difference, brother. But that was the Russian oligarchs using a black face to make their move into Brooklyn, pushing those folk out with very little concern about the precious folk who are there. That's what markets do that are obsessed primarily with profit and don't give a damn about human needs being satisfied. That's not new. That's called capitalism. So the question becomes, then how do we respond? What are our creative responses to it? And the only way you do it is by examples, collective, communal, as well as personal, individual, and in terms of memories of the folk who did it. You have to be informed by the struggles of the past. You're encouraged, you're enabled by struggles of the past and what they were up against. When Angela talks about that genealogy, and she's talking about how all these black women dealing with these sexual predation of the white male slave holders, dealing with it as domestic maids. Sister Sadia Hartman's great refusal of the sisters organizing in kitchens and so forth, trying to hold on to their humanity and integrity. And what do? Well, they raise somebody like myself, cracked vessel, trying to love his crooked neighbor with his crooked heart, but going down swinging because of memories, because of commitment, and not measuring whether I'm going to win tomorrow or next week or next year. You just keep swinging like Ella Fitzgerald. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. You keep fighting like Muhammad Ali. That's what keeps people going. And once you lose that, then you got sell-out business across the board. And part of our problem these days that the movements are so weak and so feeble. And the neo-fascism is stronger and stronger with big money, big media, big exposure, and victories. And America, of course, has always been what? Brother Nick, we were talking about this in class the other day. This is my brother who's in my class here. That John Dewey said, America is unique among nations because it ascribes metaphysical status to futurity. That's what pragmatism does, with results and consequences. You're not concerned with the past. It's only the new and the novel and the innovative. And it fetishizes that. It's like the green light that Gatsby believes in. Gatsby believed in the green light. What is the green light? Tomorrow, America will. Tomorrow you solve the problem. Tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be a perfect union. Tomorrow will be the America we always are. When does tomorrow come? How long? That's a very, very juvenile conception of being human. If all you're doing is fetishizing the future and denying your past. The only empire among the 70 empires since the emergence of the species that denies it's an empire. And when you tell them it's an empire, it says they're innocent, and you show violence. How can you be innocent and get all this violence? Well, it's manifest destiny. What the heck is that? Imperial expansion. Oh, now you hate America. No, we're just telling the truth. Because people resisted of all colors, all regions, classes and religions, they resisted it. They lost. The American empire expanded, continues to expand. Now we got 800 military units around the world. Incredible. Incredible. Russia got 20, China got 2. We got 800. They claim that they're going to take over. What are we talking about? The levels of mendacity and hypocrisy that hide the depth of barbarity. That's not anti-American, that's telling the truth, because the condition of truth is to allow the suffering to speak in any social experiment, whoever they are. And that's part of our challenge. And we don't have a strong enough movement, whatever you want to call it, left. Progressive is just too milquetoast for me. But it's just people who are concerned and love poor and working people, are willing to tell the truth and die for them. That's what movements are. And if your group of people is less and less and less and less, then it's no accident that those freedom movements, which have been the leaven in the American democratic loaf, when they're weak, the loaf gets thoroughly stale. You can't keep the loaf fresh if the movement that kept the loaf fresh are themselves weak. And people who are suffering are looking for a way out, and they see the neo-fascist options of Trump and company, and they think that it can deliver. It cannot deliver. What's going to happen after that? Oh, hell going to break loose, as Malcolm said. Chickens come home to roost. These chickens not just going to be roosting. They're going to be singing a loud song, because all that greed and hatred, when it's unleashed, believe me, we in a world of deep, deep trouble. King called it spiritual death. King said there'll be a white backlash against the black freedom movement that will lead toward a native form of fascism. That's in his last book. Where to go from here, chaos or community. That's Brother Martin right there. And he may not be right, may not be wrong, but that was a caution. And in some ways, we're living it. But I know we got to have questions.
Yeah, we're going to take 3 questions right now. We're going to 1, 2, 3. Although I got to get somebody on this side too. Okay, go for it. Let's take a few questions and then we'll.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sounds good. And I'll be much shorter.
No.
You're all very kind.
I have to ask, because we're at a law school. You mentioned Montaigne, and we're sitting here in Montaigne's 4th estate, right? Like this is it, and he doesn't trust them for obvious reasons. But, Hegel is telling us that individuals must serve the ends of laws, and that, ethical life exists in the state. Are the levers for social change to be found in laws? Are they to be found in the street? Are they to be found on a ballot? I'm just curious, where do we begin?
Great. Great opening question.
There's a number of different strategies. Could be laws, could be ballots, could be street, could be songs, could be poems, and under certain conditions, you do, in fact, have to engage in various kinds of resistance that go far beyond the kind of nonviolent resistance that King talked about. I'm not a pacifist, so I believe in just war, but very, very specific circumstances under which you have to engage even in that kind of resistance. But you hope that that's the last possible thing. But it's also true, J.F. Kennedy said that those who make nonviolent resistance impossible make violent resistance inevitable. And that's JFK, and not on the cutting edge of decolonization. He's having to tell the truth that day.
All right, well, we were going to, I don't know, maybe, go ahead.
Thank you. Slightly different question. So you've spoken of two Hegels in my mind. The sort of first, the revolutionary Hegel of 1807, the poor Hegel, and then the sort of established, the Rector Hegel, Berlin, of the Rechtsphilosophy. But in between that, there's a middle Hegel for me, the Hegel of the logic, of ontology, the exact Hegel who might resist the kind of historicization that you were talking about. What do we make of that Hegel today?
It's a wonderful question, but that's the Hegel that J.N. Finley was obsessed with. The lesser logic and the greater logic. That's not the Hegel I focus on. I think Hegel makes a fool of himself when he talks about mathematics. And I'm not saying it just because Bertrand Russell and Whitehead said that, but they're right. He makes a fool of himself when it comes to the new physics. And part of the reason why Hegel was so difficult to embrace Hegel in England and in the United States. I mean, England had a wonderful movement, McTaggart and what's our great, Green is his name?
Green.
T.H. Yeah, Thomas Hill Green and others. United States, we had St. Louis Hegelians and a few others. But when you're obsessed with the sciences and the new physics, Hegel's not the person to go to. If you're obsessed with history, society, civil society, he's got a lot of deep. But the Hegel that I love is the Hegel who says Antigone is more sublime than Socrates. That's the lectures on art and music and drama. Even in the section where he's talking about history writing, where does he situate it? Between oratory and drama. Between plays written, the lyricism of Molière, whatever it is, and oratory coming out of sermonic practices of the Reformation. But that's very rich stuff. That's very rich stuff because that's also how everyday people make sense of their world. Through language, and oratory, and music, and arts. Nothing to do with ontology, little to do with the conservative politics. So again, you're right, Hegel just so all-encompassing in that way. But I just don't make a whole lot. Do you think I should spend more time on the science of life?
I would love to if you did, but that's me. That's very selfish.
Yeah, well, some have, and I mean, let's not forget like Lenin here, right? Who, you know, at that critical moment returns to the logic, and that's where he really, that's where he finds the movement that he then applies to history, at least Lenin does, that is so important. And I mean, and so there is a way in which focusing on that work can be really helpful to think through the dialectic and the way in which the dialectic was so important. And you know, and it's and of course there's the famous, well, and then of course there's the famous passages in the Grundrisse, right, where Marx basically says, oh yeah, well, you know, I was, you know, as I was writing this, I was rereading this. I just had a spare copy of the Science of Logic, rereading it, and then all the ways in which that influences the work. So, so we'd have to think about how. I mean, particularly, you know, tonight we decided we were going to be focusing on history mostly, right? So that's why we're here, and that's why. But you know, it played an enormous role in the production of some of these incredible works, later works, and we'll be in this seminar. We'll be looking particularly at the way in which capital was influenced by the logic and other works that depended on the logic. Let me get to another question I promised here.
Thank you. I thought the point about the critical genealogy beginning with Nietzsche was really interesting, and I was wondering what you're defining as a critical genealogy, because I would trace that tradition back to the enslaved Black presence in America, going up to the blues and continuing into the present. So I was wondering, like, what you're defining as a critical genealogy.
Great. Well, so I think that there are multiple different roads that lead to a conception of a critical genealogy. I actually think that we need to think about genealogy the way Nietzsche was thinking about history, right? And so his critique of history, he was making a deep critique of the way that history was being done, right? And he then suggested, what he was suggesting was, instead of this German tradition, this Hegelian approach, which views history as a dialectical process, et cetera, and with progress, that leads to some absolute something or another, spirit or knowledge, right? We need to use history instrumentally. We need to use different ways of doing history, right? Monumental, right, antiquarian, and critical. He actually uses the term critical there, although I'm using it in a different way here. But he wanted to just use different ways of doing history in order to promote life, was the idea, right? In order to promote life, in order to promote his goal, vitality, will to power, in a way, right? So I think that somebody needs to turn off their phone, but I think that what we need to be doing is thinking the same thing about genealogy. That we've seen different ways in which genealogy has been done. People have been writing about this in terms of like debunking genealogies, right? People tend to think of Nietzsche as a debunker, a debunking genealogy. Valorizing genealogies. There are genealogies that kind of valorize the object that they are studying. And I think that, and a lot of people fight over, well, what's the right way to do genealogy? I think, no, again, it's like genealogy for praxis, we gotta there isn't like one right kind of genealogy, but it's doing genealogy in order to promote the right political praxis. And that, I think, is critical genealogy. And there's a lot of genealogy that's done today that I think is like, it's a waste of time. It's not getting me anywhere. It's not doing any work for me. But it's the ones that are doing work, like Abolition Feminism Now is an example of that. Now, and I think that, that's the idea of a critical genealogy, which I think builds on this Nietzschean tradition, but I would argue it needed something more to get there, to get to this idea. But I agree that there are multiple paths that nourish this idea, and one of them is all of the work that is reflected in a book like Abolition Feminism Now, and all of the traditions that are reflected in it in terms of struggle and fighting oppression and oppression itself. And then some of it is this conversation that we're having today about these philosophical, European thinkers who are having these confrontations and conflicts, right?
I do think just one quick element here in the Nietzschean sense is, for him, genealogy, as you recall, is also disclosing and unveiling what you thought was noble to be ignoble. So everybody's crazy about truth. Nietzsche says, what is the value of truth? Truth can be ugly and self-destructive. like the figures in The Iceman Cometh of Eugene O'Neill. If they know the truth about themselves, they'll drink more and want to kill themselves. Give them some illusions. Give them a pipe dream. Same is true in The Wild Duck of Ibsen. The last thing you want is just tell the whole truth. Because human beings can't take the truth. Often. See what I mean? So Nietzsche says, so everybody think about truth being a wonderful thing? No! Who taught you that truth is something you really want? Now that's a fascinating move. I don't think he's convincing, but it's challenging. Goodness, love. Everybody talking about love. Love ain't nothing but reduce to this envy and resentment because it allows the weak to make the stronger weaker so the weak can control the strong. I'm with the strong. I don't care about love. Crush these mother huckers. It's almost crypto-Hobbesian, isn't it? Who translated Thucydides? So Nietzsche just, let's pull the cover. Genealogy. Demystify in the Nietzschean sense. Now for Marx to demystify is to get beyond the realm of appearance, and reality is these power relations and these asymmetric power relations at the workplace that's generating predatory capitalist processes all around the world for profit and leading toward the whole world being maybe destroyed. Because the only concern is profit, even when the very conditions for the possibility of life are up for grabs, but people are for profit anyway. So you get demystifying in a Marxist sense, demystifying in a Nietzschean sense, and there's demystifying in the feminist and womanist sense and so forth and so on. And these are serious challenges, not to necessarily be accepted, but at least know what the force of their claims are. But that's a powerful question.
And in here there's also a strong valorizing genealogy, right? That's what they're doing. I mean, they're valorizing the social movements, right? Which is a different style, which also needs to be brought in the kind of genealogical work that grows out of Nietzsche. All right, Isma.
I needed some time to think about it.
All right, good.
I think we talked about history, and then you talked about like American green light futurity, and I just think the title of Abolition Feminism Now, like the now part, is really striking to me, and it reminded me of this. I think Fred Moten and Stefano Harney wrote about how the abolition of slavery was a negative abolition, where it just got rid of slavery, but it didn't build a world where slavery was never possible again. And so thinking about Angela Davis is a student of Marcuse. The student of the Great Refusal guy is now doing something that's a different kind of utopia. Like abolition is imagining a utopia. It is a positive thing. And so if you're going to build a world where none of this ever happens again, like rather than just getting rid of the thing, there's so much happening right now. What does that require now?
Well, I'll tell you.
Small question.
Another powerful question, my dear sister. I think for me, the first thing is just lifting our voices and trying to be uncompromising enough to be grounded in the best of the past. So in lifting our voices, it's comprehensive enough that it makes the connection, a solidaristic connection of oppressed people's struggles all around the world, but it's also rooted in the local, in the particular. Now, in a moment in which our backs are being pushed against the wall, and all the vicious attacks and assaults and possible incarcerations and assassinations still to come, because that's what neo-fascism is, especially in America with the white supremacists face, and the oligarch and big money and big military behind, to lift our voices at a moment where it looks as if they're so far-fetched and so far removed. But there's been similar moments in the past. There's no doubt about that. There's been similar, even in the history of this country, in terms of 1880s and 90s, the Gilded Age, the vicious attack on indigenous peoples at Wounded Knee, the crushing of the strikes in 1876 and 1892 and 1894, trying to crush the feminist movement, trying to just gain access to the vote because the 15th Amendment gave only men, including black men, but not women as well. The populist movement trying to emerge. Thomas Watson looking as if he's going to be the great leader, and he ends up what? Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. What happened, Tom? Well, I changed my mind. I don't think multiracial movements of resistance are possible in the United States. I got to fall back on my own roots. So he ends up Grand Wizard. You know the great biography by C. Van Woodward of 1938 on Thomas Watson. Well, that ought not to get us down because there were some other white brothers and sisters who held on the early Watson multiracial solidaristic thing. Raising voices, being part of solidaristic movements, no matter how unpopular they are. That, for me, is one way of trying to keep alive this grand utopian project.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions.
Brother, I go as long as you like, though, man.
All right, just a few more. Lots of hands.
We're going to have cognac after, though, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes, sir. I need some telos. I need a telos here to help me.
All right. Let's see if we can take three of them.
Maybe two or three in a row.
Group two, but two
Yeah,
to three.
that's cool.
Okay,
That's
one,
cool.
two. We're on this side. I'm sorry. Go for it.
Yeah. I always get nervous when I see you. The question I have, I just can't help thinking about your interaction on genealogy and how you brought back, you were talking about Foucault's influence on Angela Davis, and you brought it back to Angela Davis's history as an African American, the struggle against abolition. That abolition is not a brand, it's a cause, part of lived experience. And I'm thinking about all these thinkers, and the question I have is, as we're looking for solutions that are outside the box to your question, do you think there is an overemphasis on Western thinkers? Do we think that there is a solution that can come from the particular experiences of people facing particular forms of oppression and their histories? Because I even think about, why is it that you were always on the right side of history, and this in my opinion, with your positions? And I think about you talking about Fanon, and what connects you and my family is Fanon. You know, there is a connection there between the experiences of my parents and your parents, potentially. So I just think about the universality that you're being able to bring to Hegel and Foucault, that like maybe European thinkers or Western thinkers, certain types of Western thinkers are not able to bring. And so I just want to kind of offer it as a reflection and then ask you the question, if there is an overemphasis, what type of thinkers should we also be reading? What are other names that inspire you? What type of inspiration can we look beyond to gain the courage that maybe we're not finding in our tradition?
Pass it forward for a second, and then we'll pass it back.
Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. That was really, very great to hear you talk. I have a question about how we can use Hegel for the present moment. Because, so you mentioned, for example, that we could use Hegel to see the whole, but at the same time, so I'm wondering, because for Hegel, it seems to me that what guarantees the wholeness of the whole, or like that we have an idea of what the whole should look like, that we have any kind of like ethical idea, that's like guaranteed by the rationality of the whole system. So I don't believe in that rationality as well, but I'm wondering, how do we make this notion of the whole from Hegel useful without buying fully into it? Like, how can we just split it apart and take a part of it and leave the rest behind? Doesn't it just all fall apart then? Yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thanks. Pass it right back behind there, 2 rows.
Thank you very much for, my question is going to be in line with what most has been said, but I will reduce the question of genealogies to that of talking about canons, to ask what type of canons do we need in this era to bring out the level of courage that we are demanding for. And I'm asking as somebody who has experience with multiple traditions, but also understanding that the dynamics of today is different in an era of big tech and surveillance, whereby even if we have the most courageous amongst us today, once we have one shot at them, we go back to reclining. And it's not just about the fact that we have compromised compliance officers, but even at the top of places like Palantir, we have philosophers leading these places. And so we're combating, we're on a battle, we're different generals facing ourselves and not just regular soldiers. And it leads to what one of our sisters in Princeton would literally say, black faces in high spaces won't save us by and large. So what is your thought process about, again, the canons? And maybe how we can, what you're thinking about how we can go about confronting this, whether real G's should move in silence or whether we need to do something different. Thank you very much.
Should we take two more? Or no, that's already enough. Oh, that's a lot.
We can have him,
two
but
more.
we should write down these major points.
All right, I'll write them down. Let's take two more, and then maybe we'll, and then.
Wonderful questions. So.
And then maybe you'll wrap it up, but I'll try and get them down. Two more here.
Sounds good.
You too. Okay.
Professor, you spoke a lot about music tonight, blues and jazz in almost every question. And this week, as we meditated on vitality and relationship with history, I was curious how we can or should think about emerging music or cultural scenes in relation to critical projects and praxis.
Oh, pass me
on.
Professor West, is it safe to claim that all the philosophy of history is just a footnote to Hegel?
No, that's false.
Okay. It's the fact that all young philosophers like young Dewey, young Foucault, young Judith Butler, they all studied Hegel, and then they moved on from that. This country itself, the whole slavery project was justified by the intellect back then based on Hegel, and so on.
Now, I wouldn't give Hegel that much credit, positive or negative, but he's a beautiful brook of fire through which we must pass. But that doesn't mean the footnotes. Now, the figure that you mentioned are folk who went through the Hegelian brook of fire. Sheila Ben Habib said, your teacher, and Brother Brandon Terry's teacher, author of this magnificent book on shattered dreams and infinite hopes, the tragic vision of the civil rights movement. But the Hegelians don't have a monopoly on the good stuff, brother, at all, at all. Althusser has a role to play. He's anti-Hegelian. We can learn much from him. Derrida, in the end, what did he say on his deathbed? I'm a Kierkegaardian. What do you mean by that? Jewish brother, born, colonized person in French colonial Algeria, African. What do you mean you're a Kierkegaardian? Because I hold on to irony, but it's not flat irony, it's generative irony. That's Kierkegaard. Not an isolating, paralyzing irony. That's not Hegel at all. Kierkegaard, Hegel, clash. I'm more Kierkegaardian. You see what I mean? But I appreciate, I learn from, I'm deeply influenced by the best of what I understand Hegel to be. Now, in terms of whether, in fact, if we confine ourselves just to the West, we're in deep trouble. Because the West has no monopoly of the good stuff either. It's just that the West has disproportionately shaped the fate and destiny of the modern world. Those nations between the Ural Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean, for a variety of historical reasons. They got nothing to do with superiority. It has something to do with the ways in which history developed, where those nations were able to shape so much of the world, and therefore they produced both more crimes as well as voices that were critical of the crimes. So Diderot means much to me because he's a courageous brother. Muriel Rukeyser means much to me because she was courageous, just like Fannie Lou Hamer, just like Martin King, just like Stokely Carmichael and others. It's courage and integrity I'm looking for. It's not skin pigmentation, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Not at all. Somebody tell me what nation they from. I'm not impressed. I want to know what the quality of your courage is, what the quality of your commitment is, what's the longevity of your integrity. That's what it is to be a blues man. You don't come in showing everybody your guitar. Play the damn thing. Sing your song. We want to know what you sound like. How you dealing with catastrophe? How do you say good morning to heartache and heartbreak? And heartache itself is the English word created by who? First used in Shakespeare's Hamlet. First time the word was ever used. Because Shakespeare had a catastrophic sensibility. It's in Lear too. It's a human thing. Courage, truth-telling. So that confining to the West? No way. But for me, in my formation, I had to work with what I had. So I'm dreaming in the language of Toni Morrison and Milton, right? I'm dreaming in the language of George Eliot and T.S. Eliot. English. How's an African like me dreaming in English? Well, let me tell you a story about enslavement and Jim Crow, how we got here, the ship, and the appropriation of this particular language by these African peoples. So when I look at Fanon, or when I look at the Zaid, or when I look at the Maria de Key in Latin America, and all different voices from all around the world, and Betker, the great Dalit thinker, trained here at Columbia under John Dewey, writer of the Constitution in India, but fundamentally in solidarity with those people used to call it the untouchables, unapproachables, unseeables, Dalit brothers and sisters fighting with great dignity and grace. I take Betker very seriously in the letters that he and Du Bois had with one another and so forth. So you have to broaden in that way, but of course at the same time you can't know everything, so you got to work with what you got and try to be effective in that way. My dear sister, you had a question about wholeness of the whole. Oh, the wholeness of the whole, yes. There's different ways of getting at the whole, and it's connected to the question about the arts. I think it's not an accident that in professional managerial sites like Columbia and ruling class institutions that shape power elites, that the arts are so marginal in the curriculum. So marginal in the curriculum. You can have a sense of the whole. War and Peace has a sense of the whole. Middlemarch has a sense of the whole. But it's narrative. Telling lies in order to disclose truth. I think Love Supreme got a sense of the whole. Coltrane, and Elvin Jones, and Reggie, and McCoy on the piano. Kind of Blue does too. So the art can provide a sense of the whole. Proust does in his own way. Joyce does in his own way. To me, Kafka does. You read A Hunger Artist tonight, and you say, God, he's talking about United States 2026. How did you do it, Franz? You died in 1924. You wrote it in 1918. No, because Central Europe was a laboratory for the decay and decline of European empires just prior to the collapse of Europe by 1945. Kafka was already there. He saw it with his genius. He saw it with his courage. He saw it with his own sensibility. A sense of the whole in a fragmented way. Even a great figure like Lukács couldn't understand Kafka. He hated modernism. You're wrong, Georg. You're right about the 19th century with Stendhal and company, but you're not right about the modernists. How come? Your Marxism is too narrow. You better read some Brecht. You better read some other folk to get a sense of what it is to have a sense of the whole in a thoroughly fragmented, a thoroughly balkanized culture, a highly differentiated, compartmentalized, which is precisely what so much of modern culture has been, and it's even more so now. So, for Hegel, a sense of the whole is only with Begriff. It's only conceptual. It's not artistic. I think it can be in a variety of different forms. I think we have to pluralize across the board. The same is true with forms of resistance, the strategies, the tactics, and so forth. The politicians that want to go on the inside, you support them and keep them accountable. Folk who want to hit the streets and go to jail, they have a crucial role to play. Folk who just want to write poetry and tell the truth, they have a crucial role to play. Others who think about burning it down every other week or so, they have a crucial role to play, at least in the way in which they think. Now, I'm not talking about strategy and tactics, but it may come to that. You never know. No, because we got to be honest about this thing. If somebody coming, gonna talk about my mama, or my daughter, my wife or kids, I'm not a pacifist about these things at all. In the name of Jesus, I'm gonna come out swinging. Ain't no doubt about that.
No, come and eat my dog and my cat.
You ain't lying. They might eat the dog food, but they're not gonna mess with the dog.
Amen.
But the crucial thing is that, and this is very Nietzschean. Nietzsche says he wants to rank philosophers by their mirth, their ability to generate laughter. That's a very deep insight, even by a right-wing aristocratic elitist like Nietzsche. It's a deep insight because it has everything to do with so much of the lives of the folk that I grew up with. That we don't live without the David Chappelles and the Mom Maisleys and the Richard Pryors, not because they're entertainers, because life is so thoroughly absurd. You got to be able to equip yourself to deal with the incongruity and the hypocrisy and the mendacity and the barbarity. And one of the ways you preserve your humanity and agency is to be able to crack a joke and a smile and a hug and form of solidarity to keep things going, to lighten it up owing to the gravitas of what you're dealing with. And Nietzsche understood that very, very well. He said, give me a Socrates who dances and laughs. Give me a Jesus who break dances and moonwalks like Michael Jackson. Jesus may not have done it, but I've been in some black churches. I saw Jesus moonwalking all across. No, I'm just kidding. I know we got. I hope I touched on a number of the questions here.
I think so. I think we are indebted to you for this wonderful evening, for all of your insights, and for bringing together the whole, right? The Hegelian whole and the Nietzschean insights as well. Thank you so much, Cornel West.
It's beautiful. No, it is wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. All right. Thank you all.
So next week it's just the students. We're going to get ready for the next round, but the week after we'll be back. I think in here with Gayatri Spivak. Okay. All right. So I will. So thank you very much, and see you soon. All right.